Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Reed hunched over the dusty tomes in the dimly lit archive of the old university library, his fingers tracing faded ink on parchment that spoke of shadowy legends from Eastern Europe. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten secrets, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the wooden shelves under their burden. As a doctoral candidate in folklore studies, he had dedicated the past 2 years to unraveling the threads of vampire myths, piecing together accounts from medieval chronicles to whispered tales in remote villages. His thesis argued that these stories were not mere superstitions, but reflections of deeper human fears about immortality and the unknown. Tonight, he had ventured into the restricted section, armed with a special permit from his advisor, chasing a lead on a 17th century manuscript that described a coven of eternal beings who walked among mortals. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the librarian had long since left, trusting Reed to lock up. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere at first, a chill that seeped through the cracks in the stone walls, unrelated to the autumn wind outside. Then, a faint rustle echoed from the shadows, like silk brushing against stone. He looked up, his heart skipping a beat, and there she was, a woman of ethereal beauty, her skin pale as moonlight, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly crimson hue. She wore a gown that seemed woven from the night itself, flowing in dark waves that caught the faint light from his desk lamp. "You seek the truth of our kind," she said, her voice a melodic whisper that carried the weight of centuries. "But truth is a dangerous companion." Reed stammered, pushing back his chair, his mind racing to reconcile the figure before him with the rational world he knew. She moved with impossible grace, closing the distance in an instant. Her name, she revealed, was Ilara, an ancient vampire who had watched empires rise and fall. She had sensed his inquiries, drawn to the purity of his curiosity like a moth to flame. In that moment, fear and fascination warred within him, but before he could flee or call for help, she lunged, her fangs sinking into his neck with a precision that brought not agony, but a strange, intoxicating warmth. The world blurred, and darkness claimed him. When Reed awoke, it was in his small apartment on the edge of campus, the morning sun filtering through cracked blinds. His body ached, but not in the way he expected. No fever, no weakness, just a subtle tingling that spread from the bite mark on his neck. He stumbled to the mirror, expecting to see puncture wounds, but there was only smooth skin, faintly bruised. Shaking off the encounter as a hallucination born of exhaustion, he returned to his research, though doubts gnawed at him. Days turned into a week, and the changes began subtly. His once firm muscles, honed from weekend hikes, started to soften, losing their definition as if melting away under an invisible force. He dismissed it as stress, perhaps a virus, but by the end of the second week, his reflection betrayed him further. His jawline rounded, his cheekbones lifted into delicate arches, and his lips plumped with a natural fullness he had never possessed. Panic set in as his chest began to swell, tender and insistent, pushing against his shirts in ways that made him avoid mirrors altogether. His hips widened, straining his jeans, and his waist narrowed, reshaping his silhouette into something unmistakably feminine. Hair that had been short and unremarkable grew overnight, cascading in silky auburn waves that reached his shoulders, then his back, defying any attempt to cut it short. It simply regenerated by dawn. The transformation accelerated, each morning revealing more. His voice softened to a lilting soprano. His hands became slender with graceful fingers, and even his height diminished slightly, leaving him with a lithe, elegant frame. By the end of the month, the man known as Reed was gone, replaced by a woman whose beauty rivaled the vampire who had bitten her. She stared at her reflection, auburn tresses framing a face of porcelain delicacy, and whispered a new name to herself, Amira, drawn from the ancient tales she had studied, meaning princess in a language long forgotten. The bite had not turned her into a vampire in the traditional sense. No thirst for blood, no aversion to sunlight, but it had granted immortality, freezing her in this feminine form eternally. She tested the limits, venturing out under the sun without harm, eating normal food, though her body no longer aged or changed beyond this point. The university noticed her absence, but Amira slipped away, forging a new identity with the cunning that came from her altered perspective. She donned a flowing crimson dress that hugged her new curves, its fabric complementing her pale skin and auburn hair, which she let fall freely, a constant reminder of her transformation. There was no going back. The male attire felt alien now, discarded forever as she embraced the femininity that had been thrust upon her. Centuries unfolded like pages in one of her old books. In the late 19th century, Amira wandered the cobblestone streets of Victorian London, her immortal existence a secret amid the fog-shrouded gas lamps. She wore elaborate gowns of silk and lace, crimson bodices cinched at the waist, skirts billowing as she attended literary salons under assumed names. There, she documented her transformation in hidden journals, sketching the subtle shifts in her body and mind, how her thoughts had evolved to embrace intuition over brute logic, empathy weaving through her once analytical core. She befriended poets and scholars, sharing veiled hints of eternal life without revealing her truth, all while her auburn hair was pinned in elegant updos that caught the eye of admirers. One evening, at a gathering in a grand townhouse, she met a young writer named Elias, whose eyes sparkled with the fire of untamed creativity. They talked for hours about myths and the human soul, and though she felt a spark of connection, she kept her distance, knowing her immortality would outlast his mortal flame. As the 20th century dawned, Amira crossed the Atlantic, arriving in the bustling ports of New York. The roaring 20s enveloped her in a whirlwind of change. She traded Victorian constraints for flapper dresses, short crimson numbers that shimmered under jazz club lights. Her auburn hair bobbed in the fashion of the era, though it grew back if she ever tried to alter it permanently. She danced through speakeasies, the rhythm of saxophones pulsing in time with her unchanging heart. Her journals grew thicker, chronicling not just her physical form, but the emotional tapestry of eternity. Loneliness, tempered by wonder, as she watched friends age and fade while she remained. In Harlem, she immersed herself in the Renaissance, listening to poets recite verses that echoed her own hidden struggles, her feminine grace allowing her to blend seamlessly into circles of artists who celebrated the new woman of the age. The Great Depression tested her resilience. Amira moved westward, to the dusty trails of California, where she posed as a seamstress in Hollywood's budding film industry. She wore practical yet feminine attire, crimson blouses with wide-legged trousers that still accentuated her form, her auburn hair tied back in scarves as she mended costumes for starlets. Behind the scenes, she whispered stories to directors, inspiring films about eternal beings that skirted too close to her reality. One actor, a charismatic leading man named Victor, grew close to her, sharing dreams under the studio lights. Their conversations delved into the nature of identity, and though Amira longed to confide in him, she held back, her immortality a barrier as unyielding as her feminine form. She documented these encounters meticulously, noting how her transformed body influenced her interactions, drawing people in with a magnetism she hadn't possessed as Reed. World War II brought shadows of a different kind. Amira volunteered in Europe, her unchanging youth allowing her to serve in roles that demanded endurance. She wore nurses' uniforms in crisp white with crimson accents, her auburn hair pinned under caps as she tended to the wounded in makeshift hospitals. The horrors of war etched lines on mortal faces, but left her untouched, her journals filling with reflections on human fragility and her own eternal stasis. In the ruins of a bombed-out city, she saved a soldier named Thomas, pulling him from debris with strength that belied her delicate appearance. He marveled at her, calling her an angel, and in quiet moments by campfires, they shared stories of loss. Yet, as peace returned, she vanished into the crowds, leaving him to wonder about the woman with auburn hair who never seemed to tire. The post-war boom saw Amira in Paris, amid the existential cafes of the 1950s. She embraced beatnik styles, crimson turtlenecks, and slim skirts, her auburn hair flowing loose in waves that turned heads on the Seine's banks. She wrote under pseudonyms, publishing essays on mythology that hinted at her experiences, her documentation evolving into a vast archive hidden in safe deposit boxes across continents. Friendships formed with philosophers who debated the self, and one, a woman named Claire, became a confidant. Their bond deepened by shared intellectual pursuits. Amira marveled at how her feminine perspective enriched these discussions, offering insights into emotion and resilience that her old self might have overlooked. The 1960s swept her to San Francisco, where flower power and revolution bloomed. She wore flowing crimson maxi dresses adorned with beads, her auburn hair braided with wildflowers as she joined protests and communes. Her journals captured the era's turbulence, contrasting it with her unchanging form, pondering if true change was possible for an immortal. In a Haight-Ashbury gathering, she met a musician named Lena, whose guitar strums wove tales of freedom. They traveled together for a time, hitchhiking across states, sharing dreams under starry skies. Amira's femininity felt like a bridge, allowing her to connect deeply, yet she always slipped away before questions arose about her ageless beauty. By the 1970s, Amira found herself in the corporate towers of New York, disguised as a rising executive in fashion. She designed lines of feminine attire, incorporating crimson hues that echoed her first dress, her auburn hair styled in professional waves. Her documentation took digital form, early computers storing encrypted files of her transformation's nuances, how her body adapted to each era's ideals of womanhood without ever reverting. A colleague, ambitious and kind-hearted named Marcus, collaborated with her on projects, their late nights filled with laughter and innovation. Sparks flew, but Amira guarded her secret, her immortality a silent wedge. The 1980s brought glamour and excess. Amira thrived in London's music scene, wearing shoulder-padded crimson jackets over mini skirts, her auburn hair teased into voluminous styles. She managed bands, her eternal youth an asset in the fast-paced world. Journals noting the irony of outlasting trends that defined generations. A singer named Sophia became her muse, their partnership yielding hits that captured hearts. But Amira's unchanging nature forced her to fade into the background once more. Into the 1990s, she retreated to academia, posing as a professor in Seattle, lecturing on folklore in crimson blazers and slacks, her auburn hair in a neat ponytail. Students adored her, drawn to her timeless wisdom, and one prodigy, a young woman named Kira, reminded her of her former self. They co-authored papers, Amira subtly weaving her experiences into analyses, her documentation now a blend of analog and digital, preserving centuries of feminine evolution. The new millennium dawned with technological wonders. Amira navigated the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley, founding startups focused on virtual realities that simulated eternal life. She wore sleek crimson pantsuits, her auburn hair in modern cuts that framed her face perfectly. Her journals went online, encrypted in clouds, detailing how her transformed body interfaced with gadgets, enhancing her adaptability. A partner in business, tech-savvy Alex, challenged her intellect, their debates sparking innovation, yet she kept her immortality veiled. The 2010s saw her in Berlin's art scene, curating exhibits on mythological transformations. Crimson dresses returned, modern and asymmetrical, her auburn hair flowing as she mingled with creators. Friendships with artists like Nadia explored identity through installations, mirroring Amira's own journey, her records capturing emotional depths of eternal femininity. Now, in the 2020s, Amira wandered Tokyo's neon-lit streets, blending ancient grace with futuristic fashion, crimson kimono-inspired robes over techwear, her auburn hair a constant in the flux. She documented in augmented reality, overlaying her past on the present, pondering if her transformation held keys to human evolution. A new acquaintance, a researcher named Hiro, delved into similar legends, their paths crossing in unexpected ways. But as she stood on a high-rise balcony overlooking the city, a familiar chill returned, the same that had preceded her encounter centuries ago. In the shadows below, eyes gleamed crimson, watching her. Ilara, or perhaps another ancient, had returned, and Amira sensed a reckoning approaching, one that might unravel the eternity she had so carefully woven. Hope you enjoyed the story so far. The rest will be available on Patreon.